Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to the Horus Heresy, where we are still on the compilation of short stories known as the Mark of Calth, where we will be starting with a deeper darkness right after a brief word from our sponsors. If you watched the first video, you probably already know what this is about, but yes, it is indeed a brief continuation of the Raid Shadow Legends campaign that I started in the Black Ships video. Since they were so impressed with the numbers of new recruits we got through that video, they asked me to make a mention of the campaign in another one. And since I often take sponsors or do mid-roll ads in the Horus Heresy, again, I figured, why not? I'll leave it briefly there. There is a link down in the description below. If you are interested in trying out Raid Shadow Legends, then you can click it and give it a go. Or if you simply want to support the channel, then clicking it and playing through the tutorial will do that as well. Once more, thank you all very much for your attention and your patience. Now, let's get on with the Horus Heresy. And we are now on Rob Sanders' A Deeper Darkness. Another story without too much in the way of lore significance, but it does give a rather, how do I put it, interesting insight into something of 40k that I've always found a little bit interesting. So as usual, of course, we are following the Ultramarines in their battle for Calth against the Wordbearers. In this particular instance, we are following Pelion the Lesser, named so because there are people within the Ultramarines Legion who are apparently bigger badasses than him. I imagine there's a lot of letters throughout the Legion in that case. He has a particular hate boner for a word bearer by the name of Ungol Shax, who he has apparently been pursuing for quite some time in the underground archaeologies. We at first see an assault upon a small bastion of what is presumed to be word-bearers, but upon breaking into it, they only find a single one surrounded by cultists. He is swiftly killed alongside his mortal servants, but then, mysteriously, a second word-bearer emerges from a small body of water subterranean lake. He is blind, his eyes gouged out, and when he emerges, he feels the presence of the Ultramarines and asks, "Friend?" To which Pelion, resting his sword at his throat, corrects, "Foe." I giggled a bit at that one. That was a good one-liner, I gotta admit. There's also a champion of Ultramar there, who's really starting to get the gist, by the way. He chastises Pelias for being too chatty with the enemy, as previously it had a little bit of a conversation with the surviving wordbearer, a conversation that almost cost him his life as the wordbearer tried to stab him in the face, because, that's what they do. But Pelias is of the opinion that he was trying to draw information from the wordbearer about the position of Ungol Shax so he could hunt him down and murder the little bitch. Of course, the Ultramarine champion is right, isn't he? Don't listen to the wordbearers, their words are cancer and darkness, and they do try to interrogate the blind one, but he also tries to screw them over. He says, "I can damn you with but a single word, Ultramarine," and then begins speaking the word of penetralia. Not a curse or a spell like the champion thinks, but he has him shot instantly because, well, it bloody well could have been, couldn't it? You really don't want to listen over much to the word bearers, just Pipu is probably the best option in all due likelihood. But it is then later discovered, as they are preparing to explode the tunnels and seal the entire underground chamber. By the way, the Ultramarines have adopted a tactic of annihilation here. They're not trying to hold ground, they're just hunting down the wordbearers, killing them, sealing off the tunnels, then moving on to the next one, which is definitely, again, a good idea. But Palace, differs once more. He discovers that the lake appears to not be a lake at all. It is a submerged tunnel. And on the other side could be more wordbearers. Indeed, it could even be Ungol Shax himself, and so he requests a small breach group of Ultramarines to come with them to investigate. He doesn't quite get his wish, but he gets to take some Ultramarines along with some Imperial Army Auxiliary. Now, they do discover an area beyond the flood tunnels that is indeed dry. And inside of it, they find the petrified remains of several wordbearers, including what appears to be Ungol Shax. It would appear that the wordbearers, in their eagerness to summon aid from the beyond, poked a entity that was not too cooperative. See, this is kind of the problem with demons at the end of the day. Whilst obviously the wordbearers have a decent amount of knowledge about the warp and its patrons, and they have been calling upon many of these demons to possess their own flesh in the form of the Gal of Warback, there are other entities in the warp too, entities that are not necessarily aligned with the four main powers. Indeed, there are even entities that are directly opposed to the four powers. In fact, there's an entire Chaos God in that particular business. And whatever they summoned, it wasn't particularly interested in playing along with the wordbearers for whatever reason, and there could be a myriad reasons. Hell, if they just picked a random entity and brought it into life, it could have simply gone like, well, this is pretty cool. Oh hey, fleshy things whose fear fuel me. And so the wordbearers learned their lesson. Now, the cool thing here is this thing is, it does the Cthulhu thing, which honestly I consider to be extraordinarily lazy and bullshitty, where it's like, oh, it's so creepy, it just drives you mad when you look upon it. And in this case, the thing apparently is so mind-bogglingly ugly as to turn both Space Marines and mortals into statues of a darkish glass-like obsidian instantaneously, just death by ugly, essentially. Now, I don't doubt that there are warp entities that could have that power. I mean, it's the warp. It can essentially do whatever the hell it wants to do as long as there's enough people who believe in it. And this could be some kind of ancient entity with this precise power. Entirely possible. I just always find it a lazy excuse, But because at the end of the day, no matter how horrible a thing you describe, to the average reader these days who have gone through all manners of horror nonsense, it's just like, You really don't give a shit. Honestly, that's why one of those recent Resident Evil games was so creepy, because the monsters in that one wasn't monsters because they were monsters because they were human. It was really interesting. Anywho, the monster then starts stalking through the tunnels, picking off the Imperial Army Auxiliaries and the Space Marines, until only Pellus the Lesser remains, and he then figures out, okay, right, if I blind myself by cutting my helmet's power feeds, thereby, making it so that I can't see, then I can try to fight this creature. And indeed, that works out. Eventually, he defeats it with, the old Greek mythology, where he tricks the thing into seeing its own reflection, and he then goes like, "Ree," and just dies. It's not really all that interesting, honestly, but the interesting part is it kind of refers to the horror aspect of 40k, because this is very clearly trying to be a kind of horror style-ish novel. Now, it singularly fails to do so because our main character is a bloody space marine. He literally can't feel fear. And so the character you are supposed to relate to in this story is a superhuman space marine. Who even stands and hurts the thing the very first time he fights it. It's like, this isn't horror. I can't be afraid of this thing because the protagonist is beating its ass as if it wasn't even an issue, Now, 40k, honestly, it could be an amazing horror universe. It really could, but you have to approach it very, very carefully. 40k is a universe we know a great deal of, and so you should cast some doubt. Like, that was one thing the story did correct. It cast a doubt as to what it was that was haunting them, which brought a little bit of a sense of trepidation to the whole thing. That was a good idea. And then you need to have a monster, but it needs to be unseen, again, because the monster itself is not scary if you're fighting a space marine. Obviously, the protagonist shouldn't be a space marine. You should be some bumbling, dumb fuck Imperial citizen somewhere. You could actually make a really good horror game out of this, where you're an Imperial civilian, you're in a hive world, you spend a day doing your usual drudgy shit. In fact, the first, hour of the game should be drudgy shit, full of mechanics. It should constantly tell you to do things so as to keep the players interested and engaged with the promise of the horror to come. But it should just be almost kind of boring drudgery, like mini games to fill servitor skulls or some such nonsense. To kind of lure you in, it should calm you down and be like, well, what the hell is this? What the hell is the point of this? And it should be like 1 or 2 or 3 days of in-game time, an hour or so of real-life time, and it should set you into a routine, you know? It should go like, okay, you do A, then you do B, then you do C, then you do D, until one day you do A, you do B, then you do C, and then you do D, except this time D, which is, returning to your hab, you open your door, and inside is a flayed corpse hung spread eagle in the doorway. Just something completely out of nowhere that sends you into a little bit of a panic mode. A little bit of a jump scare, a quick zoom in on the corpse's face. Something like that. To really just go jolt. And then shit starts going south. Maybe the sky turns reddish. You have a few minutes to go fuck shit. And your dude's like, God, I gotta call the local police force. And you maybe run to the end of the hallway where there's a phone, pick up the phone, and blood starts pouring out of it. Then you freak out, you back out of the phone booth, you look up at the sky, it's starting to turn red, and you can see a face leering down, laughing. And then you have to run and hide from the entities. And you shouldn't even know which entities should be dangerous. Indeed, there should be entirely harmless entities as well. Just visions that run towards you and run straight past you if you call their bluff and so on. It needs to be horror in the sense of constantly forcing you to guess what is happening. Because the moment you get comfortable in a universe as well known as 40k, you'll start analyzing things. Oh, that's a bloodletter. Oh, that's a bloodthirst. Oh, that's a Nurgle demon. It does this kind of thing. In 40k, because of all the knowledge you have to take the player out of his comfort zone. Again, having them be a space marine is just shooting yourself in the goddamn foot so hard it isn't even funny. So, anyways, a little bit of a sideways rant there, but I honestly think that 40k horror could be amazing, but it needs... How do I put this? 40k horror could be amazing, but it needs to not be 40k. I know that sounds confusing, but 40k is an action universe. It's a cool universe. It's a setting for, gunfight and superhuman soldiers. It can't be that. You almost need to have 40k wear the skin of a horror game. It needs to be more about the aesthetics, really more so than the setting. But again, I really think you could do something really cool with it. Anywho, there's really not all that much lore related that's of particular interest in this story, beyond an example of, the Dwellers Beyond deciding to bite the word bearers in the ass, demonstrating that, yes, demons are not necessarily the most cuddly of pets. And so, I am going to simply just skip on forwards to Aaron Dembski-Bowden's The Underworld War. And this one is a pretty damn neat one, giving us a view of the underground war, the never-ending crusade for Calth's many tunnels from the perspective of the word bearers. And how do I put it? How doubt, I suppose, slowly but surely starts to seep into the minds of even the most zealous of word-bearers. We are introduced to a member of the Gal Vorbach by the name of Cortal, who will later become known as the Apostate. He has found a small band of word-bearers, or, well, one, wordbearer, Thule, in one of the many underground caverns surrounded by a large group of his surviving devotees, his cultists, his last remaining warrior strength on this planet. It has been almost 7 years of unremitting underground war, and that is what has begun to break Cortal's faith. He mentions that for quite some time now, he has not been actively participating in the war. He hasn't been fighting. He has simply been moving from one underground cave to another, witnessing, observing, and counting the dead. Thule thinks that this means that he has been counting the dead of the Ultramarines and states that they've killed thousands of them, perhaps even tens of thousands. But Cortal corrects him, and instead says that he has not been counting the Ultramarines, because it would be pointless to do so. Instead, he has been counting the word bearers dead. He has been counting them, and counting them, and counting them, and the losses are severe. He has given up on counting them. Now he simply marks the passage of entire chapters of the word-bearers in runic emblems on his armor, and he asks Thule, where are they now? Indeed, where are Thule's brothers? What has happened to the grand word-bearers' army sent to humble the Ultramarines? All dead, or dying at the very least. And yet, despite having stayed on this hellish planet now for 7 years, no reinforcements have arrived. No rescue fleet have arrived. Lorgar has not, as he mentioned, appeared from the warp as if through some miraculous force to salvage what remains of his sons. They have been abandoned. Now, Thule appears to be practically the only one who has realized this. The apostate is the only one. Thule, indeed, even goes so far as to say, what do you mean to do now? And when he responds that he is going for the surface, that he is going to find some way to escape this hellhole, Thule, mortally wounded by the Ultramarines just days earlier, states that that would make him an apostate. It would make him a traitor against the Legion, and Thule would have to kill him for it. Cortal simply just says that he understands that Thule has to try. He then kills the Terminator, and presumably what little remains of his war band, if you can call a scattered bunch of cultists something quite so grand. He then proceeds to the surface in his quest for a way to escape Calth. But, bearing in mind, it is not weakness or cowardice that makes him seek a way off this dying planet poisoned by a dead star. No. In fact, what he is trying to do is bring a memory of those who died at Calth to the Legion. He will scour the surface for yet further chapter icons, and he will bring them to the Legion and toss them at Lorgar's feet and demand that they be remembered. I quite like this. It's a touch of humanity to the word-bearers, which is, well, interesting considering what's going to be happening eventually, of course, but we're not quite there yet now, are we? He then continues across the surface as he starts encountering visions. At first they seem mundane, like he hears voices, the dead rising up and accusing him of betraying them, stuff like that. The demon that is within his flesh eventually wakes up as well. It had been severely wounded by an Ultramarines librarian earlier on. The Ultramarines presumably starting to figure out that librarians are good against these creatures. Now, this was an interesting little moment too, because, well, we'll get to it in a moment, but my first thought upon reading that was, wait, the Ultramarines are using librarians now, but in the previous short story, they were still maintaining the ban of Nicaea. But then again, it has been 7 years, so Apparently, some things have changed, right? He then continues across the surface, and eventually the demon awakens once more, and urges for him to hunt, to seek blood, to find something with which to nourish the creature. Demons are not the most cooperative of things, is it? Like, oh, we're on the surface of a dying world poisoned by a radioactive star. Hunt! Hunt fucking what? Anywho, the apostate tells the creature just that. There is nothing to hunt. There is nothing for it to satiate its hunger upon. He also goes so far as to suppress the demonic entity using a mental mantra that he has come up with. Apparently, he does this frequently. Instead of simply allowing the creature to run rampant within his flesh, he tries to suppress it whenever possible, keeping it down in the depths of his mind rather than allowing it to run free. Interesting. The demon eventually shrinks away from his chastisement and busies itself within his body, which is apparently riddled with all manners of horrible cancerous growths. I really like this part too, because it demonstrates the symbiotic relationship between the host and the demon. The demon is like, oh, look at all of these little black things growing inside of you. This doesn't look particularly healthy. Here, allow me to squishy squash some of them. And he just starts pulping them and distributing them through his bloodstream, where the demonic presence can presumably devour them, eat them, or, well, at the very least, somehow neutralize them and prevent them from killing the host entirely. I like that. It's a nice little symbiotic touch, which I quite enjoyed. But eventually, the visions become ever more strident until, whilst hauling one corpse up from the dust of Calth, he lets go as it calls out his name, but the corpse keeps rising. It doesn't stop. It keeps coming out of the dust. He starts freaking out at this, unsurprisingly, I do suppose, and wondering what the hell is going on. Previously, the demon had given him an excuse. Oh, no, it's just pustulous, bilious growths, growing on your brain. Don't worry about it. It's fine. And I mean, that sounded reasonable to him. I mean, again, his brain is not in tip-top shape, to put it rather bloody mildly, so some pustules here and there, sure, that makes a great deal of sense. But now, that comforting lie is starting to fall by the wayside rather rapidly. These does not appear to be mere pustules. This appears to be a genuine thing reaching up to try and kill him. And as he begs the demon to help him, to allow the transformation to take place so that he may fight back against these things overrunning him, the demon simply laughs at him and calls him a weak host. You betray your brothers, it says, and now you beg me for succor. No, the demon says, it does not want to inhabit such a weak host. Ooh. Now that is very interesting. We now get a little bit more of a flashback to a time aboard the Wordbearer's vessel, where Argal Tal is carrying out rituals to convert, I suppose, to try and create more Gal Vorbak. He gives the willing two alternatives. Either they can chastise themselves, they can flay their own flesh, they can fast, they can scourge themselves of all wants and open themselves up to a demonic entity, or, alternatively, Argal Tal can bring the willing sacrifices to an area of the ship where the Gellerfields are lowered. And then, whilst exposed to the warp in all its glory, Argal Tal will convert them the same way the other Gal Vorbak were converted, via death. Our little apostate immediately leaps at this. He wants to be converted the way the Gal Vorbak were converted, because clearly that is the true path. And as he himself mentioned, why would any true believer choose to spend weeks, months praying and fasting? Surely only a faithless coward would choose these longer, drawn-out forms of sacrifice when there is a quicker, more direct opportunity. It makes sense. And so, he bares his throat to the master of the Gal Vorbak and bid him strike. And so Argyltal does. And yet, no matter how long Argyltal waits, the corpse does not rise. The demon has not manifested. It has not taken over the flesh of the apostate. And I gotta admit, I often bitch about the lack of surprise in many of these twists. They're too telegraphed, they're too obvious, they feel like somebody's hitting you over the head with a bloody manuscript. This one? No, this was a good twist. This was a very good twist, because it turns out the demon never actually took this man's flesh in the first place. Instead, this was a test that the demon gave to him to see if he was worthy. It showed the apostate visions of the future. It showed him Calth. It showed him the underground war that stretched on for year after year. And eventually, he chose to betray his brothers. He chose to abandon the underground war in favor of bringing memories back to the Legion, something the demon did not approve and in fact even chastised him for. He failed his brothers, he betrayed the Legion. If he was allowed to continue to do this, mayhaps even he would try to pull the Legion back from the brink. No. Cortal was weak. Cortal was flawed. And so the demon, instead of manifesting within his flesh, chose to let him bleed out right there on the deck of the Wordbearer's warship. Oh, that was a good twist. That was a good twist. I liked that one. I liked that one a lot. I mean, me and ADBs, we're probably never going to be agreeing on much, to put it mildly, but that was a fine little work of 40k right there. Because not only was it a good twist, it also actually gave us genuinely interesting insight into the Wordbearer's Legion. Argyltal complains to Lorgar that he can't do this. He can't keep doing this because they keep dying. This was the 13th, and in those he has only had a single success. He has killed 13 of his brothers and has only had one of them ascend. And that is not good for Argyltal's psyche. It is driving him close to madness, because Argyltal is a far more, well, human individual than Lorgar. Far, far more human. But Lorgar, of course, simply just says that, okay, well, if I have to lose 13 sons for one Gal Vorbak, then that is a sacrifice I will make willingly. In fact, he even goes so far as to say that if you can give me one Gal Vorbak for 13 sons, I will thank you until the stars themselves freeze in the firmament. Ah, Lorgar. Lorgar's a bad dude. Lorgar is a very bad dude. And as if that wasn't enough, he takes it one step further. He asks Argyltal if the demonic entity that had rejected the sacrifice was still hanging around. He could kind of feel it in the room, and so he asks for its name. And Argyltal gives it to him. Nuglitch, or something like that. And then Lorgar says, go down to the apothecarian and butcher one of those who lay wounded there after Istvan, and inter him within a dreadnought sarcophagus. Let us see if the demon can be enticed with stronger prey. Fucking hell. See, this is the guy that so many people keep going like, oh, he's just misunderstood. No, he's not misunderstood. I am not misunderstanding this. He is just an incredibly bad person. He is just a monster. That is all that Lorgar is. That is all he ever will be. And again, he is the worst kind of monster, because he is the kind of monster that knows what he is doing is wrong. He absolutely does, and simply just keeps going regardless. But hey, at least I can say this time that was a damn good story. That was a damn good story. And the best part, not so much as a single bloody loyalist anywhere to mess it up by being utterly retarded and worthless. Oh, God. ADB, I swear to God, when he's simply just allowed to write chaos, he is so good. He does it so bloody well. I mean, I would argue that Lorgar, the book, The First Heretic, was by far one of his weaker displays when it comes to chaos. In this book, this short story more precisely, so good. Now then, with that out of the way, let us move on to number 7, John Frencher's Athame. This is another one without a whole lot in the way of lore significance. It isn't also a particularly interesting story, honestly. It is the tale of an Athame, one of the magical blades created to fulfill destiny. In this case, a relatively minor blade that would eventually end up in the hands of Ol Pearson and allow him to cut through the skin of reality and escape Calth. Now that is a little bit interesting, because that is of course a beneficial thing for the Imperium, presumably. There's even a moment where a Golden Lord that, well, he sounds a lot like Big E, but, it's kind of difficult to tell necessarily. He's certainly described in such a way as to presumably make the reader think of the Emperor, who kills the Athame's master at that point in time, but leaves the blade behind. Now, if this is indeed Big E, then he would almost certainly know what an Athame is. Well, or actually, would he? I mean, this is so far back during the history of humanity that at this point the Emperor would not yet have arrived at the conclusion that he would have to take an active part in guiding humanity. He may, in fact, at this point, not yet understand the significance of something like an Athame. He might simply view it as a vile weapon. Something, the wielder needs to be killed, but the weapon itself is not a tool of destiny, per se, because he does not yet perceive the world in that way. He hasn't begun to shape history in quite the way that he would, of course, eventually start doing. It's a little bit of both, but the alternative interpretation is, of course, that he was entirely aware of what this thing was, and he allowed it to be lost specifically because He knew what it was. Specifically because he knew that it would eventually end up in the hands of Ol Pearson, and because he knew that this would allow Ol to escape a dire danger at some point in the extraordinarily distant future. But now we're reaching. now we are really, really reaching, and no real doubt about it. But yeah, it is an interesting theoretical, if nothing else, isn't it? But still, yeah, it's a cool little idea. But honestly, all in all, there's not that much to mention here beyond. I mean, it's kind of a cool story in that we get to see things from the perspective of a knife, and it also goes some way to demonstrate, I suppose, the level of interference, of direct control, the scale of the plan required to actually end up with this. Like, if we assume indeed that there was an entity somewhere capable of making a plan to see this knife on a planet a couple million years in the future, or God only knows how long, that does give you an idea of just how powerful these entities are and how wide-reaching their plans are. But there's even a little mention at the end of the book, the short story, which basically goes like, oh, well, future is not set in stone, this is all hindsight, you could have been one amongst thousands, and, I mean, referring to the knife here as you, and so there is not necessarily any certainty in any of this. This is just the way that faith decided to fall in this particular instance. There might have been knives made of steel or iron or indeed flint like this blade, and nothing was ever truly set in stone, which is, again, interesting, but it's so thoroughly theoretical as to be of relatively little value from a lore perspective, honestly. So we'll fairly swiftly move on to the last of the short stories, methinks. That being Dan Abnett's Unmarked. And this one is all about Ol and his little merry band, or, well, sad and sodden band in all due reality, of refugees fleeing Calth the only way they could, by opening a hole in reality through which they have a lengthy travel, guided at the very least in part by John Grammaticus, who leads them to areas where they can recover, or times? A mix of the two, times and places where they can recover weapons, where they can rest for short periods of time, and where they can gather food and water before heading on to the next cut, all needing to make several incisions in the fabric of reality to throw off a demonic entity that is pursuing them. The main gist of this story is basically Ol has been alive for a very long time, and has gone through quite a lot of wars, battles, and adventures, mentioning at several points, for example, having joined Jason and the Argonauts on their little trip across the high seas. I shan't go over too much of that because, well, it's suffice to say, Ol is old and he's been around the block more than once. But there are a couple of interesting little mentions. One, for example, they are sent back to a Earth in ancient prehistory, long before humanity really became, well, humanity at all. And they are assaulted by a band of screaming, feral, monkey-like creatures that run yelling towards them. After having killed these things using the weapons they scavenged earlier, Ol notes that they are apparently a sign of how early humanity was corrupted by chaos. Corrupted is perhaps the incorrect word. How early chaos began to exert an influence over humanity. Now, this particular mention, I think, is both interesting and kind of banal at the very same time, because what it's basically saying is humanity was under the influence of the Chaos powers from one of its earliest inceptions, which is not really a surprise at all, because, well, it's chaos. Chaos affects essentially everything. Though it does raise some odd little questions as to, okay, so is this before or after the fall of the Eldar Empire? Because before that, the gods of chaos were essentially enslaved to the will of the Eldar, and of course the older ones were probably the creators of humanity, just like they were the creators of so much life in the galaxy. Did they have a goal in mind for humanity? Did they create the perpetuals? If so, how did chaos corrupt these proto-human beings? It's a bit of a strange thing. I think it's more of, I don't know, because the timeline of ancient 40k is all kinds of retarded, but I think probably this is a small instance of writeritis rather than a overly valid plot point. But again, with how unclear this particular period is, it's actually kind of difficult to really tell, honestly. Anywho, they proceed through multiple battles until the demonic entity catches up with them because, well, one of the people that all has decided to bring along, not having, the ruthlessness required to just have them die back on Calth, is a latent psyker. And apparently the demon can smell and track her, even as they travel through time and space, which opens up a whole wide variety of questions there as well. At one point, All even notices a sign left scratched in the metal of a knocked out main battle tank. Now, that opens up a whole can of worms as well, so are you now telling me that if one can open these rifts in the void, which all apparently can, then he has been trained in the ability to do so by a member of the Romani tribe, then why is any of this happening? Okay, so this is an ancient technique to travel through time and space, and they are able to do things within this reality that other time travelers can see as well. I am generally not fond of the idea of time travel because it usually raises far more questions than it answers unless you have established a firm set of rules, which, well, 40k hasn't, because up until the Horus Heresy, we didn't really do all that much in the way of time travel, again, because it's usually not a particularly good story thing. Because, I don't know, if you just accept it at face value, it's fine, but in cases like this, alright, if we have time travel, so, and this is another point that was kind of broken open. The word bearers, with Algaltal at the head, were supposed to travel back in time to the Emperor's laboratory, right? Where they did some kind of nonsensy fuckery to scatter the Primarchs across the galaxy. Now that is apparently no longer a thing because they invented a new way that happened. I'll probably have to get into that at some point as well, full video format in all due likelihood. But now they can scratch symbols into tanks. Like, are they limited in their actions? Why couldn't they pop back and, prevent Horus from getting stabbed? Why couldn't they pop all the way back in time and simply shatter the Athame in its very creation? Why couldn't they prevent the ship from crashing into the moon? Why couldn't they prevent Angron from being captured, etc., 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 etc.? I really do despise time travel in these things. Maybe it's explained in more detail in the further out Horus Heresy books, but regardless, when you don't have a firm reason, a firm rationale, and a firm set of rules for time travel, it all, to me, just comes across as like feeling like because I said so storytelling, rather than anything truly related to the universe. But it's a bit of a private or personal misgiving, perhaps. Anywho, the demon shows up and starts picking away at all, tormenting him because he's so very, very old. He has so very, very many bad memories for the demon to, touch and toy and prod with. Except, unfortunately, the demon apparently forgot to bring along a alarm clock because Grammaticus had arrived earlier and informed all that the demon would be pulled away for a greater destiny at some point. And it apparently got so interested in messing with All's head that it completely forgot all about that and suddenly just disappears. Just like that. And the demon was literally breathing down All's neck at the point where it vanished. I had a whole little rant about dramatic convenience not that long ago, so I'll save you the rerun, but by God. I kind of blame the fact that it's a short story, and therefore there's not really enough time to set it up properly, but the entire idea of an eternal, immortal, demonic monstrosity, literally within inches of its target, suddenly going like, shit, I'm out of time, and then fucking off. It does mention that it is dragged off rather than leaving voluntarily, but really? The guards couldn't have given it, 10 seconds, or maybe sent it a bit of a reminder first, like, this is your 5-minute warning, get a move on, lazy bitch. But no, it's just pulls it off. How much do you want to bet that's going to become very, very significant somewhere down the line? Time travel. Fucking time travel. Not a fan of time travel. Even less of a fan of time travel than I am dramatic convenience. The little psychic girl is probably going to turn out to be rather important as well, Misa thinks. Now, this last story also, there's one very important part in it, very important, quote unquote, that mentions a conversation All had with the Emperor. He mentions specifically, and again, this is a bit of a problem with the lore, he mentions that the Emperor was unique. He had never met anyone quite like him. He'd never met a perpetual like him, and it was one of the first times meeting a perpetual too. Now, this is suggesting that the Emperor is a perpetual, which in and of itself is interesting, because of course originally it was supposed to be a gathering of shamanic spirits and such on nonsense, which I always disliked that explanation because I felt it was too mystical and nonsensy. Honestly, the Emperor is one of those characters that should not have his backstory explored. At this point in time, he is such a well-established fixture in 40k that any backstory whatsoever that the writers can come up with for him is just going to feel like a downgrade. He is at this point described as an entity whose name as the Emperor is fully fitting. That he is a being that just, you look at him and you go, yeah. The Emperor. That is the only possible name for such a creature. Like, that gives him so much weight, so much gravitas, so much impact upon the story just by being the Emperor. And yet, of course, we will, again, a fucking book. I'll get into more of that later again, but let's just say that they decided to just kind of ruin a lot of that. But it all mentions that he is unique, which of course apparently turns out not to be, because bullshit, and I'm not even going to get into that here. It's too much to do in one of these breakdown videos. It deserves a full video at some point in the not too distant future, or hell, by the time that you're listening to this, I might even already have done it. Time flows in oh so strange ways, does it not? But regardless, it does show, because All Person mentions that the Emperor played his grand games, and All was like, haha, this is not for me, no, I shall not be going down this path. I will simply live a unremarkable life of peace and prosperity and so on. And the Emperor, pointing out that he's goddamn immortal, just says, oh, you can have as many of those lives as you want, but eventually the fact that you are a perpetual will catch up with you. Paraphrasing here. And here, all is running a errand on behalf of John Grammaticus to try and, as he put it, salvage the Emperor's plans. It's also interesting because, of course, this again tells us that, okay, what is All Person doing? Well, he's traveling through time and space to fix something, to fix a mistake and salvage the Emperor's plans, which again opens up the rabbit hole of why the fuck didn't they do this previously before half the galaxy was on fire. Yeah. I'm just gonna wrap it up there because this is literally one of those subjects that you can talk yourself in circle over for all eternity. That is the bloody problem with time travel plots. If you don't have firm rules, they're only going to be nonsensy. But with that, we have gotten through yet another short story compilation. So, until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening. And next up, of course, is Nick Kime's Vulcan Lives, which it's a bit of an odd one. That really is a bit of a strange book. I don't dislike it, but I don't like it necessarily either. It's a strange one, that one. Anywho, until then, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Did I already say that? I probably did. Have a good day.